because of government. And they never would have been able to grow to the extent that they did if it wasn't for government. And of course, one of the very reasons that so many financial institutions are in trouble, so many of the major banks in this country, and of course all of our major banks would already be insolvent. They would already be broke if they hadn't got money from the government and if the Fed hadn't been buying up all these assets. But one of the reasons that no one cared is because of the FDIC insurance program. I mean, nobody in this country cares at all what the banks do with our money once we put it there, because it's all insured by the government. No one cares. Doesn't matter. People do a lot of research before they buy a plasma TV, but nobody does any research before they put their money in the bank. No one cares. Like, who can care? Because the government has created a moral hazard by guaranteeing the accounts. If the government didn't guarantee bank accounts, then banks would not be doing foolish things with our deposits. Because people would care. Because people would know, gee, if you make loans and they don't get paid back, I'm going to lose my money. So banks would not just compete on how much interest they pay, but they would compete on how safe their balance sheets are. And there would be a lot of people looking out for them, because probably individual consumers, before they made a deposit, would want to look for some type of equivalent of a consumer's report, where somebody rates banks and follows banks and says, here's the safe banks. Nobody bothers to do that now. Why? Because no one is any riskier than anybody else, because they're all guaranteed by the government. It doesn't matter. But it creates a huge moral hazard when you do that. I mean, the same thing, I mean, look what Bernie Madoff was able to pull off, right? I mean, you think he could have done that without the SEC, giving him a stamp of approval, or without FINRA? I mean, there's no way that if we didn't have regulators, the private sector wouldn't have ferreted this guy out. There would have been a lot more due diligence if everybody didn't think the government was doing it for us. And of course, I said, instead of putting Bernie Madoff in jail, we should just make him Secretary of the Treasury. Because he's got a lot of experience, exactly the kind that we need in running a Ponzi scheme. Because, the Chinese just mentioned yesterday that they were getting a little concerned about all the money they loaned us, and that just maybe we won't pay them back. I'm sure they're a lot more than just a little concerned, because that's what they said publicly. Imagine what they're saying privately, because they know we're not going to pay them back. Of course we're not going to pay the Chinese back their money. It's impossible. We can't possibly. And can you imagine if President Obama, given the following type of speech to the American citizens, to say, national televised address, and say, my fellow Americans, I've got a little news for you today. We're going to have a massive, across-the-board tax increase on average working Americans. Any American that still has a job is going to have to pay much higher income taxes. And as a matter of fact, we're going to have to cut Social Security across the board. If you're getting a Social Security check, we're going to have to reduce it. And remember all my plans about more education and health care for everybody and, energy independence? We got to put all those plans on hold because the Chinese need their money. We borrowed a lot of money from the Chinese, and we're good for our debts. They worked hard for that money, and they loaned it to us, and we're going to pay it back. Now, that's going to require a big sacrifice on our part. Does anyone think that we're going to do that? What, are they kidding me? We're going to tell the Chinese? We're going to say, you guys are predators, predatory lenders. We need a modification program. We need to cram down on this. You never should have lent us all this money. You know we can't pay it back. It's not our fault. The Chinese know this. The Chinese, they can't even vote in our elections. Why are we going to care what they think? We're going to tax voters to pay non-voters? So the Chinese know they're in this box. The U.S. government, we don't pay our bills. We're like Bernie Madoff, right? People loan us money. How do we pay it back? We borrow more. Right? If somebody came to Bernie Madoff a couple years ago and wanted their money, they got it. Why did they get it? Because they were able to take in new money. They found another sucker who didn't know it was a Ponzi scheme. Same thing the U.S. government does. Every time a bond matures, we just go sell another one. And every time we need to pay interest on the national debt, we go borrow that too. Well, it works until nobody wants to lend us any more money. Then we're going to have to default, just like Bernie did. And there's only two ways we can default. We just legitimately don't pay, or we print money. That's it. There's only two ways to repudiate your debt. There's no way we're going to pay the debt. The Chinese have to know that. And we're going to figure that out. But anyway, I'm going to get back to it. I keep going off on too many tangents. But, all right, so the free market, that's where I was. The free market was getting the blame for a problem that was created by the government. And what's happening now, of course, is the government is using this economic crisis that they caused to get even bigger, to grow their power, to expand, to come to our rescue, to save us from the evil forces of capitalism with government, with socialism. And, you know, when you listen to Barack Obama, I listened to his most recent speech, and a lot of what he said was true. He talked about the fact that we need a genuine economy. We can't have a false prosperity. We can't have a prosperity based on debt and spending. We need to have a sound foundation. All that was true. But then, of course, everything else he said is wrong. I mean, he wants the U.S. economy to have a sound foundation, but he wants to be the one that builds it. He thinks the government can erect a sound foundation, that central government planning can replace the market, that resources can be allocated efficiently by politicians who want to get votes, as opposed to entrepreneurs who are looking for profits. Right? He wants to replace the invisible hand with the hand of the state, and he thinks that he could do it better. I mean, the problem is, sure, we had a phony economy. That's true. We had a phony economy because of the government, because the government undermined our productive capacity, undermined our ability to save, undermined our ability to manufacture, and nurtured and cultivated the consumer bubble, the service sector economy that we had that's now collapsed. And it's not government that's going to restore it. We need free market forces. The government right now, everything that they're doing, what is the government trying to do right now? They want to bail people out and they want to stimulate. Well, the bailouts are the worst thing that you can do because they want to bail out companies that should fail, that should be bankrupted. Bankruptcy is a good thing. It's the way the market cleanses the economy of companies that shouldn't be there. Why shouldn't they be there? Because they're not generating profits. They are not effectively utilizing resources. Those resources need to be freed up. Right now they're being held hostage. We need to free them up so that we can use them productively. You know, they say, oh, we can't let General Motors go bankrupt because some auto workers will be unemployed. Well, I mean, we don't want work just so we can have a job. We want work because we can produce something. We want the value, right? I mean, if somehow, we can all have like little machine and we could just push little buttons and whatever we wanted would magically appear, right? Nobody would have to work, right? And the government, of course, would try to outlaw those gadgets because it would create a lot of unemployment. But who would care? We wouldn't need employment. We would have everything we want. So we work because we want stuff, not because we want to work. So just to preserve jobs doesn't make any sense if they're not productive, if they're not efficient. Now, I can understand why some of the auto workers would want to preserve their jobs if they're being overpaid. I certainly can understand why a lot of these executives want to preserve their jobs. But society doesn't want to do it. The government shouldn't be doing it. We need to let companies go bankrupt. And when I talk about letting, General Motors go bankrupt, and I was predicting that they would go bankrupt 5 or 6 years ago. I knew they couldn't survive. But if we let them go bankrupt, does that mean it's an end to the automobile industry? Does that mean that all those plants in Detroit or in the Detroit area are just going to sit idle? That all those skilled workers are just going to sit there and nobody is going to try to hire them? Of course not.